Good evening. Welcome to today's Tropics for July 2nd, 2021. Please note, I'm not a meteorologist, and this video is just a collection of my thoughts and opinions about the storm I'm talking about. And for any decision making, please consult National Hurricane Center or your local officials. So today I'm looking at Hurricane Elsa. It actually rapidly intensified in the past 24 hours, and so it is now a hurricane. It seems per recon data, it has weakened in the past few hours, which isn't quite as or too much of a surprise since the center hasn't really had much of any real convection over it for the past few hours. But there is a new burst on the eastern side, so I'll have to watch that because that is basically what is the scene of our next kind of so-called model battle between one very bullish model and one that and most of the rest, or most of the rest of the guidance, which has become quite a, or some of it has become quite a lot less bullish on this storm. So I'll have to see what this new burst to the east of the center does. So if we look at the infrared imagery here, it is yeah, pretty cold convection here bursting uh, again on the east side here, and it is negative 70 degrees Celsius, couple of pixels of negative 80. So we got deep convection and certainly supported with some of the moisture here. There is that northwesterly mid-level shear that is still hurting the storm because of that weaker mid-level flow versus Elsa's 30-mile-an-hour movement to generally the west or west-northwest. And so you've got some convection that's trying to get going pretty much directly down shear of the storm, and then it thrives down shear right, but once it tries getting up shear, that's when it starts having some trouble. So we're going to see if it can start wrapping convection into its up shear side, and that would mean it would be strengthening more likely, and the HWork model, which again is very bullish, might have a better chance of verifying. Now we have a recon mission that's currently in Elsa, and it did find that there isn't really much of an inner core anymore, like there was was this afternoon when there was deep convection over the center. So that really isn't a surprise. It has also filled in a bit. It's a bit weaker at 996 or 997 millibars. So that again isn't a surprise. But one thing that was a bit of a surprise to me was that if you kind of take a look at the mid-level or at the pressure estimates, which are extrapolated, and then you also take a look at the wind barbs. If you note that the plane is flying at 700 millibars, so this is mid-level, and has actually been displaced from the surface center for today, even when it was deeper. Notice that minimum pressure is actually pretty much co-located over that mid-level center. So it seems that somehow, even though there wasn't really much convection, uh, it's somehow managed to actually align. So it might actually be a bit better organized now, if it doesn't like kind of decouple a bit again. So that would definitely be something in favor of this storm if it keeps around for its legitimate signal. And on the eastern side in that convection, you're having some flight level winds, which are kind of knocking on 70 knots, but the SFMR so far isn't too impressive. 55, maybe 60 knots. So this may have fallen back to, say, a 60-knot tropical storm, just because there hasn't really been a whole lot of convection in this area. But it could strengthen. It might not, but it definitely has the chance to. So in terms of track, it's still a little uncertain because the track is different based on how strong the storm is. But in general, we still have the same sort of thing going on. This is valid Monday morning, so on the 18Z GFS run, so that's the latest one. It has Elsa right near Cuba as a rather weak storm, but looking at the actual steering flow, see this trough dropping down, the subtropical ridge kind of getting eroded on that west side, and then a bit of another sort of weak ridge over here. If you go further up, it's actually stronger, and this has some steering implications for stronger storms, and it's also going to be a cause of some mid-level shear as it's in the northwestern Caribbean. So this is definitely something important to watch for. Uh, but basically, it will probably keep moving generally west-northwestward into this area, and then be near a lot of the Greater Antilles, like Cuba, like Jamaica, and like Hispaniola, especially on the southwestern side, like Haiti. Uh, so that in itself is a little uncertain. So you might have it go a bit north and hit Haiti and then Cuba, or if it goes south and hit Jamaica. It's harder to tell, but we're going to have to watch the short-term trends and see what happens, and also see what exactly Elsa does. Because if it, given that this ridge is actually stronger the further up we go, that would mean that Elsa would actually be further south if it's stronger, and also further north if it is uh, if it's weaker based on that steering flow. Uh, and the problem with these islands is we can't be certain enough that it'll be over water or not in such a small area between these. So that is causing a big divergence in the intensity. Uh, So, if it goes a bit more north, say over some of these mountainous islands, then it might end up weakening. Uh, but so we'll have to see what happens, because that could kind of take it down a notch in terms of peak intensity if it tries to strengthen, but runs into the mountainous terrain. But that's not the only thing that is causing some big uncertainty in the future peak intensity. We've again, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we do have a so-called model battle that's about to be ongoing based on trends tonight, and they disagree quite a lot in the short term. So there's been a lot of intensity headaches because the guidance just cannot agree on how strong this will be. Usually there's some sort of consensus, but we've got always. It seems that there's always been one reliable model, at least one reliable model, that's very weak with it for some reason, and one that's very strong with it for some reason. And we haven't really been able to, uh, you know, get some sort of consensus over here. So that's why the com- the the confidence has been so low lately. So looking at the GFS here, which is a kind of the bearish case. So this is what happens if we end up having a weaker Elsa. That will GFS will probably be closer to verifying if this convective burst that's currently ongoing on the eastern semicircle of Elsa can't wrap up shear and kind of get stuck here. So that means it's got dry air in its western end and it can't wrap. So it can't really strengthen a whole lot, and it stays a rather weak storm, and kind of stays north as a result of that. And then as it kind of tries to get going near Jamaica and kind of tries to wrap, but then it's still kind of weak. So you end up with a much weaker storm because it isn't really able to intensify much at all as it gets kind of near Hispaniola. Now the H wharf here, it's able to get some up shear convection and some moisture basically by tonight. So luckily we'll see which model is closer to being correct very soon. And basically once, you know, it keeps it kind of sloppy like it is right now. It's verifying actually quite well in the very near term. Uh, but if it does do this, based on the H wharf output, it should start deepening again as it gets wraps that convection around tonight, and then it basically bombs it out into a major hurricane and eventually hits Cuba. So I'm not saying this will happen. I'm not saying this is realistic. But once we have recon data, the H-Wharf does tend to be quite a reliable model, so I wouldn't ignore it, but I wouldn't say that this will happen because it is pretty much alone versus all the other guidance. So that can sometimes mean that this one is sort of out to lunch, in so to speak, in some respect. But I wouldn't, especially if this keeps on going, it doesn't back off in the next couple of runs. I would keep my eye on this, but so far, uh, I wouldn't say that this will happen uh, in general. Another thing too, aside from the wrapping around, is that it seems that the GFS has a bit of a stronger ridge to the west at the mid levels, around 400 to 500 millibars. So as a result, you kind of have this flow that's pretty weak, and generally out of the east or even east northeast, and that really contrasts with the low level flow. That's a lot more southeasterly and stronger. So that means you end up getting a decent bit of that northwesterly mid-level shear, even if there's easterlies within the entire column. And so that means you end up getting, that trouble to wrap, and it seems to hurt the storm more since it's stronger. Uh, on the flip side here, the HWRF, it does have some of that northwesterly or northerly mid-level shear, and you can see it's 16 knots here. But given that it wraps it up a lot, it seems to kind of shrug it off. But look, kind of comparing between the GFS and the HWRF here, you see that the flow is slightly stronger in the mid levels, and the flow isn't. You don't see those kind of northwest or northeasterly or barbs. It's generally just kind of out of the east, so you have less directional shear, slightly less speed shear, and so you end up with a bit less mid-level shear from weaker ridge to east. And so you have a storm that, once it's wrapped, it also has weaker mid-level shear to deal with, and it can really get going into the northwestern Caribbean. And the consensus is that you're going to have generally southeasterly flow at the low levels. That's quite strong, but weaker and more easterly towards the mid levels. So this also suggests, steering wise, that you're going to have a slower and more westward moving storm if it's stronger, and that would mean more south, and then a faster moving and more northwesterly moving storm. So that would be kind of trending further north if it's weak. So that's one reason why I have low confidence for steering, because the flow kind of changes around depending on how strong it is. Looking at the official National Hurricane Center forecast for it, it's passed by the islands now, and it's moving very, very fast. It's at 30 miles per hour. So again, it's about as fast as Tropical Storm Chantal in 2013. So this is a very fast tropical cyclone, but as that ridge to the north, it passes by and kind of gets onto the western part of it, and the ridge also starts getting eroded. It's going to start slowing down probably tomorrow, and then that kind of uh, weak south side will probably start to improve as it becomes less asymmetric because it's not moving so fast, and that might provide better conditions, because a fast moving storm is it's harder to get organized just because it's moving so fast. But if it starts to weaken, or if the flow starts to weaken, then it might be able to stack up a little more. So far, it seems that the National Hurricane Center at this point is keeping it as in line with a lot of the guidance, which doesn't really strengthen it too much. So it kind of keeps it around this, and weakens it a little bit, and then weakens it to tropical storm after it interacts with Cuba. So this is a very realistic forecast right now. But the confidence is very low, and it could change up or down depending on some of the trends we see. Now, we do have watches and warnings up, tropical storm warnings and watches for the northern part of Hispaniola, which probably will be missed by the peak of Elsa as it passes by, but we'll see some strong winds. But the main risk here is for eastern Cuba so far, the southern part of Hispaniola, or at least more the western part of Hispaniola, and Jamaica. And those are those are where the hurricane warnings or watches are posted, as Elsa is likely to kind of go near these islands, or perhaps over them. And so what they'll what will happen is probably strong hurricane winds as it passes by, and possibly flooding rain, especially if we get upsloping flow that causes convection and heavy rain. So a possibility for flooding and mudslides, but also again the wind as it passes by. Probably going to see some watches get moved up Cuba as time passes, but so far it's a bit too far out for the more western part of Cuba to get watches and warnings. Eventually, as it curves northward, it seems that Florida is in the crosshairs for Elsa at this point, and so uh, if you are in Florida, especially towards the western coast at this time point, uh, you should be prepared for something to hit within the next few days. Again, the confidence is low, so it could be just, say, a tropical storm, but it could be a bit stronger if it kind of avoids more land, uh, or it is able to kind of strengthen, as the H word says. But right now, we just don't know, but we will know a bit more tomorrow morning. However, unfortunately, we won't quite know a whole lot about land interaction, so we'll have to kind of nowcast that as it comes. But if you are in Florida, do be prepared, because you should be expecting possible impacts probably early next week. There isn't a whole lot else to talk about Elsa at this point, so that's about it for tonight. If you have any questions, comments about my video, please let me know. Thanks for watching.